So, Dr. Muhlhauser, thank you for joining the Model Mindset. Let's hop right in. What sparked your interest in the psychology field?
Thank you for having me, first of all.
Of course.
I have a little bit of a long story for that.
Love it.
I wanted to be a pediatrician since I was 8 years old. So I did everything pre-med. I volunteered at hospitals. I was completely infatuated with everything to do with medicine. So I went to Providence College. I was biology pre-med. Apparently I don't have the best memory, so my organic chemistry grade was not the greatest, and decided my junior year of college to take up my first psychology class ever. And while I was doing that, I had a really great teacher. I forgot her name, but she was a health psychology teacher, and she pulled me aside and said, "Why don't you do this? Like, you're made for this."
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, "Well, because I'm supposed to go pre-med." So sure enough, by my senior year, I decided not to go pre-med. I went full-fledged psychology. I took major risks because I only studied psychology for 2 years, and I decided to try to get my doctorate. I was very lucky to get in.
Wow.
And I was the newbie. I was surrounded by people who were 10 years older than me and had tons of experience, and I had to learn everything as quickly as possible.
Wow.
I got into psychology primarily because it's part of the medical field. I think that, nowadays we can see that our emotions affect our health affects our emotions. Mind-body connection is so strong.
Speaking our language.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
And then on top of that, I obviously enjoy people. I believe everybody has a story. I believe we unfortunately judge people, we categorize them too quickly. I think if we sit and listen to everybody has a very important story that we should, try to find out and discover. And the other part of it is I love to analyze. To me, being a psychologist is helping people, watching them progress, teaching them, educating them, but also trying to figure out what are the missing puzzles. Like you take a look and say, what happened in this background to contribute to what's happening today? Or let's look at the dynamics, how have experiences shape this person, or how do they affect other people, etc. So it's a little bit of private investigator work as well.
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
Very
That's cool.
exciting.
That is really cool.
And so, when you were going through schooling, I know we had spoken to Lori Singer back in January. She actually had to go and experience therapy herself. Did you have to do that a part of your schooling, like actually go through it?
We were required to go for therapy outside of school or in school. I think the closest thing that happened was we had to kind of simulate a group therapy experience. So we all had to take on personas and try to act them out, but we're humans, and so our real selves come out. And so as we did that, I think that was the closest experience to therapy within the program. However, we were definitely encouraged to do it outside of the program to kind of be in touch with who we are, what are our insecurities, what are our strengths, what are our dynamics, and how do they impact us or play an important part.
What's unique too is when we were speaking with Lori, she had a tough childhood. Her mother was an alcoholic. Her dad ended up, raising her, but then she had lost a child when he was 2 because of cancer. And so when she was kind of like required a part of her schooling to experience therapy, it's like she unlocked all of this because she never really grieved. And so she began to heal. And so she said like that was instrumental to her healing journey, and for her to really experience that, because then she was starting to implement like certain tools or practices to help her, so then she could understand, okay, these can be applied to someone else that may be experiencing something similar or something else. So I thought that was extremely fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. I did go for my own therapy twice. The first
before like your schooling, you're saying?
No. Once I was in schooling, so I did go because I think At one point, for the first time, I was experiencing some panic attacks. And I didn't know what they were. You know, you can read all the books you want, but when you experience your first one, you're like, there's something wrong with me. Unfortunately, that was not. So here's one of the great things about therapy is I'm a big believer, try out your therapist. And I did not have a successful experience. I did not like the person I worked with, stepped away. And then further on in my career or my education, I did go to another therapist. And at that point in time, again, so here's my MO. I've always was a perfectionist. I always wanted to be the best that I could be. I could not say no. I was a people pleaser. So I kept doing and doing and doing and doing. And before you know it, I was in a position where I was working 14-hour days, and I was singing, and I was going to school, and I was doing everything. And couldn't say no. I enjoyed it. I didn't want to say no, but then I came to find out my body finally was telling me, you can't do this anymore. You can't do this anymore. So I think through therapy, when I did go, I learned, why am I doing this to myself? Why do I need to please others? Why do I have to take this on? Well, because I was good at it, you know, and when you're good at something, you don't want to let go of it. And so I had to make peace with things just being good enough. And enjoying being a young person, you know, because I never did that. Since I was 8, like I said, I want to be a pediatrician, and I was so focused that I just was work.
Wow, that is interesting.
So it was not until I want to say my mid-20s that I started letting go. It's kind of like once I got to mid-20s, I became younger.
Wow.
Now, I'm sorry, do you think that like came with maturity as well? Do you think maturity played a part in that as far as understanding yourself a little better? Or do you think it was just kind of having those experiences at that time was just a coincidence?
I don't think maturity in that situation. No, I think it was kind of a crisis moment for me to say, I can't keep living like this. And I think that I had the opportunity to look back and say, why am I doing this to myself? And, you know, I was a shy girl. You know, I didn't have a lot of friends. I kept to myself, but I was really good at academics. So you come to find out, you know, if you're really good at academics and you keep getting those A's, it just keeps encouraging you to do the same thing over and over again. And when the teachers call on you because you're well behaved and you're nice, you keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then you learn how to hide everything.
That's so it's really interesting because my wife and I just had this conversation. It had to have been last week. So she's in the process of going for her doctorate right now. And she has a lot of the same things you were just saying. Can't say no to things as far as like her grades. Like if she doesn't get an A on everything she does, it's because she's always gotten them. So it's like I have to keep that, you know, keep that up. It's expected of me. And so she's trying to balance working full time for like a national school, and then she's going for her doctorate. We have 2 kids, and she's just going and going, 14-hour days, like you said. And we had a conversation last week where she mentioned something new that was going to be going on at work, and that she would likely be broached with it. And she was already panicking about it, like already having like anxiety about, okay, what's one more thing on my plate now? And I said, you need to learn the word no. Because you don't ever say it, people assume the answer will always be yes.
That's a good point.
And it was just, it's so interesting. You're literally painting the exact conversation we had. And it made me realize that a simple thing like the word no is an absolute obstacle for many people.
Many people. And it is extremely difficult to say if you are not used to saying it. Because your first automatic thought is, I'm going to disappoint people.
100%. Especially me, because I'm in the corporate world. You know, when your manager, your director comes to you with something, you have to say yes. Like normally no, but at the same time, if you're, you know, we use the word capacity a lot. If your capacity is like at its limit, where you're gonna lose your shit if you accept another thing, you almost feel obligated to do it, even though you know if I accept this, something's gonna fall through the cracks, but you do it anyway. But I think that when you learn to say no, does there come like a certain amount of power where you're like, I am prioritizing my life and I say yes to what is going to bring me joy or
Yes, but it takes a long time to get there. So, and I'm sure we're going to get into a lot of this, is that when you create change, it's not an immediate experience. You first, so what I always tell people is it gets worse before it gets better. So the first time you say no, people are going to look at you like, what do you mean? You know, and then you're going to feel pressured, then you're going to feel guilty, then you're going to say, this is not working. But if you stick with it, people start reacting in a different way towards you. But then you also have to have that self-belief of like, this is right for me. I want to reduce the amount of stress in my life. I want to put my family first. I want to have more time with my spouse, you know. And if you say it over and over again, the positive self-talk, you will get there, and then it becomes second nature to you.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time. It's not an overnight process.
Yeah, that's 100% true. I know you agree with that
This is
as
gonna
well.
be a great episode.
Yeah.
Great episode. Yeah.
So let's get back to you for a minute here, because it's interesting how we want to know maybe how you landed here in this particular practice, right? So experiencing different psychology avenues in your time of, I'm sure, getting to where you are today, what landed you here in this particular spot as far as in this practice?
So I will tell you a little bit about my past, my history, and the places I've worked. So when I was in my doctorate program, you have to do 2 years of externship, and then amongst that, I worked at a high school, which was one of my most fun experiences. I worked at a clinic, and then after that, you were required to do a national internship, and where you apply to places, and then you number them 1 through 5 what you want to do in terms of your needs and your desires, and each individual internship also does the same thing for people. I was very lucky. I got my first choice. It was Columbus Children's Hospital in Ohio.
Oh wow.
And when I first started going to psychology, of course, I wanted to be a pediatrician, so I obviously wanted to work with children and adolescents. So most of my training was in that realm, and Children's Hospital was fantastic because I got to use some of the health experiences that I was trained to do. And I was able to kind of mix both of it. So I did a lot of your typical kind of mental health work in terms of working with anxiety and ADHD and depression. But then when we were in the hospital, we got to see cases like, for example, the most interesting cases. There was one child that hiccuped for an entire week. They could not stop it. So we were a psych consult. We would come in and try to talk to them, saying, you know, is there something psychologically rooted in this? They come to find it, and they said, no, we're fine. Our life is good. And then once you go through their kind of history, there's a whole list of things that are happening all at the same time. So it was really interesting to see, again, the impact of stress on children in a hospital. So I was there for a year. Went from there to I became what we call a float clinician. So I was working at inpatient hospitals. I worked in partial hospital programs with adults, with children, with adolescents, wherever they need me. And I finally kind of settled in the adolescent position where I was in charge of doing group therapy. And these are all kids who we had to keep from being hospitalized. So they were not healthy enough to be maintained once a week. They needed a higher level of care. It was one of my favorite experiences ever. And you're thrown into the fire. You have to learn so quickly and think on your feet constantly. So it was probably one of my best training experiences because you have to learn everything so quickly. But there's burnout because it's at crisis every day, emergency every day. So I was lucky. I went to a clinic, got some great experience at a clinic, and then my supervisor, who happened to be my supervisor in Columbus, Ohio, had moved to Connecticut and started private practice, contacted me and say, hey, you want to join private practice? And I said, sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome.
That was my dream. So 29 years old, started on my own private practice, and it's been 22 years now.
Wow. Now, how did you settle on, because your practice primarily focuses on mood disorders relative to anxiety, transitions in life, and then health issues. How did you specifically target or focus on those areas?
Okay. First of all, those are probably the areas that are, people seek help the most in those areas.
Right,
totally makes
so,
sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
right,
you've got that going on, and I think when, just like any young person, regardless of what field you're in, when you're in a new business, you're taking on everything.
Oh, yeah.
You're not saying no to anything.
Feel that right now.
Yeah, right, exactly, right.
So it was a little bit of hit or miss. I found I did not do with anger management. That was just not a strength of mine. I found out I don't want to work with eating disorders or, addictions, or something so specific as I had one case that was multiple personalities, or what we call dissociative identity disorder these days. And I said, that's not my area of expertise. I'll refer to somebody else. But what I came to find out was just most people were stressed. Most people were anxious. Most people did not understand their bodies. And I believe that educating people about their bodies helps them figure out what's happening with them. I'm a big believer that your emotions are not just something they're attacking you or they're just coming about. They're here to educate you. They're telling you something.
Yes.
So I found that here's our good news, is that anxiety disorders are actually one of the easier things to treat if you have willing people who are going to follow through with recommendations. Because it is so much education, it is so much coping strategies, it's so much about just changing your thoughts about things. And if you do that consistently, you will see progress in that area. Now obviously with depression, again, a high population of people with depression for multiple reasons. You have the ones that are grieving, you have people who are going through changes in lives, and there are people who are just genetically predisposed. And we try to get them to get supports and to exercise. I'm sure we'll talk more about that as well. But I just found that these are the areas that, again, high population, high need, and I found very interesting. And I think my personality worked well with them because I'm not very forceful. I am positive, but I'm also encouraging, and I do want people, my goal is to empower people. That it really is what I believe in.
That's awesome.
And then one last thing is just like the health stuff. It fascinates me, and again, it's education of you have a migraine. It is not just something physical happening to you. What else is happening in your life? What do we do to kind of decrease the stress? And again, body is very, very interesting. I've had people come in who have been incredibly dizzy for months, and their doctors are like, I think this is psychological. And once you start kind of checking out the baggage, they start feeling better because they're starting to release things that are happening for them.
It's funny how you say anxiety is like almost like your body telling you something, because I heard anxiety is like it's an alarm for your body.
Yeah.
And you mentioned genetics. Is epigenetics a part of that? Like your environment kind of dictates your behaviors?
So, there's so much research out there. So, I guess we look at it. Anxiety and a lot of the mood disorders can also be very biopsychosocial. So, there is definitely a genetic factor for many, many people. One of the first questions when I meet somebody is, "What's your family history?" And that's partially because there could be a genetic marker. It doesn't mean you are going to be anxious like your mother was, but what it might mean, if you are under the right circumstances, that anxiety might flare up.
Gotcha.
Then you have also parenting. Anxious parents are more likely to have anxious children. Anxious parents tend to check, have rules, and carry a lot of stress around them. So kids tend to pick up on that, and they start to recognize the world is unsafe. And so they start checking their own behaviors.
Right.
Same thing with kind of a depressive experience. If you have a depressed parents, you're more likely to feel down. You're more likely to not have a positive experience at home. So you might, for outside, you might make some mistakes. So I think it's definitely a combination of, you have the genetics, you have your own free will, and then you have your circumstances that you're in.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is. So I say that because my wife and I will have conversations a lot about that kind of stuff, where like setting a lot of the boundaries and rules, and we have a lot of like the let the kids be kids conversations, let them do like risky play, like those type of things, like that kind of, like we make it a point to like let it happen, you know, like obviously they're not running around like maniacs, but at the same time you are letting them experience those things that the guidelines aren't on them so much, right? So when parents or kids are identifying that and saying, yes, we have had that in the past, how do you go about finding solutions for that?
In terms of, I'm sorry.
With the patients, so that if the patients are identifying that in their past, right?
Right.
What are the solutions for that, kind of for them to move forward with?
Okay. So, are we talking about kids or adults or anybody?
Oh, could we start with kids first?
Yeah, let's start with
Yeah,
kids
we
first.
can.
And then we'll go to adults?
Okay. So I'm gonna a little bit of a disclaimer.
Okay,
I
of
don't
course.
work with kids much anymore.
Okay.
But I do work with adolescents
Mhm.
and I do work with adults. I'll be honest with you. Once I had my small kids, as they grew older, I was like, I can't work with kids and go home with and have more kids. Like, it just was a lot.
That's a
Oh,
good
So I kind
very
of backed
good
off
point.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Good point.
But I think with the younger kids, when I did practice with like middle school and below, I was a big advocate for parental involvement. So it's education to the parents as well of your parental responses to anxiety or having parents watch their own anxiety. When it came to the children, it was all about breathing techniques, coping strategies, normalizing their feelings, validating them. I think one of the, you guys are around my generation, a little younger, but growing up, the biggest thing you heard was, oh, you don't have to be afraid. Oh, you don't have to feel this way.
Yes, yep.
And that kind of messed people up a little bit
Yeah.
because you're like, well, then I guess what I'm feeling is wrong, so something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
So in this day and age, what we encourage people to do is, like, for my first day of school, my daughter will say something I'm really nervous about my first day of school, and I'll say, yeah, I could see why you'd be nervous about it.
Yeah.
Most kids are nervous about it. But I bet you you're gonna have a great day. I bet you, why don't you bring your favorite water bottle with you, you know?
Yeah.
And
It's
I
helpful.
can't wait to hear about it when you get home.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's really
love
about validating the experience, so that way you recognize it, creating a little bit of a plan, and then doing a check-in when they come back. So you do want to have like a positive spin on it without negating their fears.
For sure.
I love that.
But yeah, no, I think working with children, it really is about modeling for them. It is about, I'm a big believer with smaller kids. One of my favorite things to do ever is create worry boxes. So you can say like bad mood boxes or worry boxes, and you would take like a shoe box and have the kids decorate it. And whenever they had a worry, they'd write it on a piece of paper or draw whatever it is that made them worried and drop it in there. And after a week, you can throw it away. And with the idea of like,
Is that
these are your
visualization
feelings.
part of that
so it's
too?
a little bit of visualization, but it is this idea of getting rid of whatever it is. Once you put it in the box, it's gone.
I like that.
That's really interesting.
That's cool. That's cool.
So it could be very, very effective for kids.
And you mentioned kind of like following up, like when they have you know their first day of school, but then following when they get home, like how was it, like recapping it almost.
Right.
That communication factor with adolescents and kids. Do you feel like the more open lines of communication and honest they are with the child, the better that they can associate with problem solving and those type of things? Like, do you feel like the more honest you are with kids, like, because my wife and I have those conversations, I'm sure you and Val will have them as the older the boys get too, with, you know, we talked about death recently in my house, you know what I mean, and we're very honest with them on what's going on. Like a family member of mine is now sick, and we had the honest conversation with them. This is what's going on, and they made the association of my dad being sick and passing away. So they asked more questions about death. We were very honest with them.
Right.
But our lines of communication are very open, and they're very honest.
Right.
Is there benefits in that, do you feel, as far as
absolutely.
you know, maybe not sugarcoating stuff to kids a lot?
Yeah, you know, I think again, it's
To a certain extent.
appropriate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes,
You know,
of course.
developmentally appropriate discussions are very important. And I think there are people out there that want to protect their children so much that unfortunately they live in a little bit of a bubble.
Yeah.
And then when they have their first crises, it is magnified because they've never had to really struggle before. So yes, I believe that earlier on, talking to kids about death, for example, I think is incredibly important. I mean, you can choose whether or not you bring them to a wake or to a funeral. That's all parent dependent.
Yeah.
But I think having those discussions of what death means, what friendship means, what marriage means, what religion, all of these bigger things, war. I mean, obviously there's war right now.
Yes, exactly.
To have age appropriate discussions of what might be going on.
Yeah.
But not over discussing as well, because that's the other issue that we see very frequently is that parents sometimes over talk because of their own needs, and kids are overexposed at times, and they're feeling strange feelings that they can't identify. And it's too much for them because they're young.
Exactly, they're not developed enough to understand maybe those feelings and stuff.
Yes.
And that kind of stuff has happened too in my home where, like, even today, my daughter mentioned she had a stay put drill, as they're called at school.
Right.
And when those things started happening for them when they went to school, we knew there was going to be questions about maybe why that is. And I felt uncomfortable having those conversations with my daughters.
Yes.
And I remember talking to my wife about it one time. I'm like, I'm not ready for that conversation yet. I'm not there yet. They may be able to understand it, and my wife was on the other side of it. Well, we should at least tell them something about it. And so it was interesting that was on my behalf where I wasn't ready, so we came to like a middle ground, and it was a good conversation we had, but it was age appropriate. It was what we thought they could understand in their development in that age. So it's just very interesting you say that, because all these things you're saying, I'm like, oh my God, I've been there,
Now, was it for you, John, because you didn't want to think about that being a possibility could happen?
For sure. Also, I didn't want to ruin the experience of school for them, because they love it. And I was just like, it's such an innocent thing they have right now. I don't want to take any innocence from them in that environment. I want them to go there 100% feeling safe, because I know the school's doing everything they can.
Absolutely.
So I don't want to make them have to ask the questions to people at school and making the connection of, well, they're not keeping me safe, because they are.
Right.
So that coupled with the innocence part of it is what made me not ready for that yet.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's all that stuff is super. What about adults now? We talked about kids. What about adults? Right?
Yeah,
I don't want to forget anything
How
here,
do
right?
we treat adults with mood disorders?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, what are some common practices you use with? I'm sure things are different for everybody, right? But are there some common ground?
Yes, there is definitely a lot of common ground.
Okay.
So psychoeducation, I think, is incredibly important in terms of. So I think naming it, naming what's happening for them, saying you have an anxiety disorder, you have generalized anxiety disorder, or you have a major depression. I think that gives a little bit of power. I'm not big into labeling because, we do it for insurance purposes. We do it to kind of put a name on it. But I'm a big believer again that you're an individual that's experiencing this now. This is not your entire life.
Don't identify with it.
Yes. Right. One of the my pet peeves is teenagers walking around saying, I have anxiety. And you know what I respond?
It's very prevalent now.
I say, I have anxiety too, because we all experience anxiety.
Right.
We all experience sadness. It's part of life. So it's different to have an anxiety disorder, if that makes sense.
It does, yes.
So naming what's happening. So there's two aspects. One is talking about coping strategies. So breathing is the number one thing I teach everyone. I don't know, whatever you come in here for, let's start with the breath. Because the breath will slow your body down. It will slow the heart rate, it will slow, lower the blood pressure, it will do everything for you. It will just relax you. So once you do that, you feel more empowered, you feel more relaxed, you feel more rational and logical. And I feel like you can do what if you're angry, if you're scared, and if you are excited, nervous about a podcast. And I say to everybody, I'm like, the other thing too is you could do it anywhere and nobody can tell that you're doing it. So right before a test, You can be doing deep breathing and nobody knows that you're doing it.
Yeah.
But it's the number one tool you can carry everywhere that you go.
Is there a certain breathing practice you
just gonna
use?
ask you
Or
that.
you? Because
Well, I do.
jumped on it. Sorry.
No, I love it. I love it. No, I keep it simple. I educate everybody about belly breathing.
Mhm.
So we do the belly breathing. I teach them how to count. I teach them how to slow it down. So we, everybody starts fast, and then
Yep.
we kind of encourage them to basically inhale, hold it, and then exhale for 5 counts rather than 3.
Yep.
And I do it with my clients all the time, and I feel so relaxed afterwards too.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's just everybody's chill.
Yeah.
So breathing is one. We do relaxation techniques, kind of just letting go of, kind of checking in with your body, doing body scans. We talk about exercise as being the number one tool for both anxiety and depression. Moving is key. I think both kinds of moving. I think that in terms of just increasing your heart rate is incredibly important, but I think it's also yoga and relaxation is incredibly important. People hate this discussion, but also good food.
That's
They
huge.
don't recognize.
I love this conversation. I love this conversation.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm talking about the day after Halloween.
Oh, yeah,
Like
right,
the
yeah.
Kit Kats.
Yeah.
But
20 Milky Ways
but-
deep, yeah.
it's very hard for people to recognize that their diets can impact their mood.
Yeah,
But I say
Yeah, your food is your mood.
it is completely. It is, and many people will say, I'm eating really healthy. I eat bagels and well, let's talk about bagels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
right.
not the greatest food for you because high carb foods will drag you down, both anxiety as well as depression. So diet is something that we talk about as well. Just anything that makes people feel good. We always come up with a list of anything that makes you feel good. On the other hand, we also talk about cognition. So that's the other really important
go.
side.
Here we
Okay,
go.
which is this idea of how you said, we feel the way we eat. Well, we feel the way we think.
Yeah.
So it's all about identifying the way that we think about our situations. For example, my perfectionism. If I don't do this right, I will be a failure. Okay, so that is definitely a cognitive distortion. So taking a look at the way you think about things and really doing what we call restructuring, where we're switching it around. So with everybody that comes in, I try to get them to journal. Just journal
Love
for
it.
a week or
I
two.
love journaling.
I want to see, and then bring it in because I want to decipher let's look at the patterns. What is it? Is it an issue with your self-esteem? Is it an issue with your confidence? Is you're not lovable? Is it that you're not good enough? And let's take a look at the words that you use. And then what will be the next step is how do we switch? How do we switch into a much more positive mindset? How do we, my goal for everybody is, and my favorite saying, and people say this all the time, and it's wonderful. At one point they'll be like, so I was thinking about this, and then I heard your voice in my ear. And I said, that means you're internalizing it. Because I'm always the cheerleader. I'm always the one saying, well, no, let's look at the positive aspect. So when people start thinking about what I'm saying, it means they're really outside of the office. They are thinking about how to change those situations. So our mind is, the great thing is if we have access, if we take the time, if we really look at it and we do the work, we can switch things around. But it takes a lot of effort. A lot of effort. The other thing, part of that too, is also just gratitude journals. That is an instant, how do I look at the world in a positive way? It's so easy for us to say, how's your day? Well, this went wrong, this went wrong, this went wrong. Okay, well, what went right? And what do you have to be thankful for? And I have sometimes people say, really nothing. I'm like, well, did you have a cup of coffee? Yeah. I'm like, was it good? Be thankful for the cup of coffee you had. Did you sleep in the bed today? Be thankful for
We
that.
talk about that.
Yeah.
That people think gratitude has to be on such a large, grand scale.
Yes.
And that's the complete misconception of gratitude. That coupled with when people are practicing gratitude, you're not actually present in that moment when you're thinking about what you're grateful for, and you're just doing it as a practice rather than being intentional with it.
Exactly.
That it's not effective. essentially,
Exactly.
right? So we talk about that
Yeah.
every day when I do my gratitude practice. There's a lot of small things on there, but things like if the sun's out, I'm thankful that I can have sunshine
Yes.
because I know what that provides for me, right?
Yeah.
But you're right, coffee, those things are, it's not silly, and people assume it's a silly thing to be
Right.
grateful for,
Right.
and it's not.
No.
Yeah.
I
No.
love you. I
Yeah.
love that you mentioned that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think it's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
To piggyback off of you use the word mindfulness, so that's the other thing
Mm.
that, I teach everybody is, and I am guilty of it. I always tell people the Northeast is one of the most stressful places on earth to live.
I've heard that regularly, that the
Yes.
Northeast is just
It is
different.
awful. You go to other parts of the country
Yeah.
and you have to adjust to their slower pace. At
Mhm.
first you're like, you're tapping your fingers like, oh my gosh, these people are talking to me.
Right, yeah.
And they need to
right.
get out.
Yeah.
And then you kind of slow your pace, you slow your roll,
Yep.
and you realize, okay, life is happier. You go to different countries and
Mhm.
their values are completely different
Yeah.
than us. And then you go back to the Northeast where people don't look at you sometimes.
Yeah.
Everybody's rushing.
I was gonna say everyone's in a rush.
Everybody's
Yeah.
in a rush. So,
Yeah.
so when we talk about mindfulness, people are like, well, I don't have 3 minutes. I say, yes, you do have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Everybody has 3 minutes.
Yes.
And what I teach them to do is actually one of the first things I have them do is sit in my office and say, pick one thing, just one thing in my office, and I want you to describe it to me in so much detail that I can picture it in my mind.
Wow.
And they will sit and they will look at it and I'll keep prodding for more information. And then afterwards I'll say, so were you able to think about all your worries while you were doing that?
I love that because you're shifting their focus.
Absolutely.
That's really
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just educating them that when you are truly mindful and
Mhm.
present, you are calming your system down. You are not thinking about everything else that's
Mhm.
going on. And then I encourage them oftentimes to go outdoors. And I said,
Yeah.
it's amazing if you see, especially this time of year, you take a look at the trees and you just
Mhm.
you can watch one leaf fall at a time, and it's a beautiful experience to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like lunch. I'm like, how many of you actually taste your food?
Yeah,
That's a
right.
good point.
Yeah.
You're not
And I
working
said-
through it, shoveling in your face,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
Exactly. So
So true.
sit down, take one bite, put your fork down,
Yep.
taste your food, and take it from
Yeah.
there, and then
Mhm.
expand your practice as you go along.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think when people think about mindfulness or they think about meditation, they get overwhelmed by the idea because they first think, oh, I'm supposed to be levitating for 20 minutes.
I know.
Well,
It's so true because
Yeah.
we practice. He does movement meditation.
Yeah.
And I do about like a 3-minute meditation.
yes,
I either
right.
do a breathing meditation or I do like one where I just sit there for like 5 minutes and do like these positive affirmations and stuff
Right.
like that. But it's amazing.
It is
And it's,
amazing.
again, it's
I
just
love it.
it's training your mind to focus on just building a positive foundation for the day.
Absolutely. And intentions are fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's the other part of it too, is waking up with an intention. And I'm religious, we do know that people who are religious tend to be happier people.
Mhm.
And I think part of it is because prayer is like intentions. It is like meditation. It is about that positive psychology, about setting forth an idea as well.
Yeah.
So I think in whatever way you do, you wake up in the morning and you set that intention and you have those moments for yourself,
Mhm.
you're much more likely to have a good day.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
For sure, absolutely.
Before we put like a bow on the mood disorders,
Right.
I just wanted to ask, do mood disorders, so like your anxiety, your depression, do those typically stem from childhood experiences that carry with them to adulthood that they just maybe haven't explored and healed?
I love that question. So yes. It's often yes. I think so. It starts with childhood. Again, I tell everybody, it's not your parents' fault.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to say, well, my mother, my father did this. No. What happens is as you grow and your brain develops, you hear messages and you perceive them in your own way. And yes, do we as parents make mistakes? Absolutely.
All the time.
Absolutely, all
Yeah.
the time.
Mhm.
We say things, we do things, and we also have our issues that become magnified at times. So as a child, you start developing these experiences based on what people tell you, and you start creating your own messages as a defense mechanism. and it might have worked when you were a child, but when you're 25 years old and in a relationship, you can't defend yourself anymore. You need to share and be open.
Mm-hmm.
So part of therapy is saying what happened, where in your life did something go wrong, or what message did you give yourself?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so a lot of time, I'll be honest with you, a lot of time it's middle school. Well, nobody liked me in middle school. Everybody stopped talking to me in middle school, so I knew something was wrong with me. You know, so it's going back and saying, okay, well, let's practice some self-care, some self-love, some self-compassion. Or, you know, I'll use me as an example. I was shy, and what I got through my head was, I have to perform, I have to perform, I have to be the good girl.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was. And it took me a while to recognize, no, I was doing that because I felt good about it, and I got rewarded for it. So I need to break that down as well. So, yeah.
Wow. That's awesome.
It is cool.
That
It
is
is
awesome.
very cool.
That is awesome. Wow. And this just came to me, and so I just would like to get your take. Do you think people struggle with being happy because they're constantly thinking about the future and not living in the present?
I think that's one of the factors.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think that, again, let's talk about society. I think it's a societal question.
Yeah.
I think that we are raised from day one to, I don't know how many times, especially I have a child who's in high school. Where are you going to college? What do you want to be when you grow up?
That's pressure.
You know, so it is pressure. You know, what is it that you want to do later on when you're 40 years old?
Yeah.
You know, and like, well, you're just a kid right now.
Yeah.
So you have time to explore this. So I think we're a very forward-thinking society of do more, want more. There's pressure the minute you turn on TV. The minute you pick up your phone, you've got ads constantly. So I think we should delve into social media.
That's what was my next question to you too. How much of that is impacted by our cell phones?
So there are some studies out there. I'm trying to think. I think it was 2016, where there were rapid increases in anxiety and depression in teenagers.
And I wanted to ask you that before. I didn't want to cut you off. I'm glad you brought me back to it. It seems like to me, and I could be wrong here, it seems like to me, depression, anxiety, all these disorders are much more prevalent now than they were, say, 10 years ago.
Right.
And now, is that because of the evolution of things like social media and things like that? Do you feel like they kind of go hand in hand in the way they've progressed in social media? Those disorders have kind of followed that trend as well?
That's what we believe. I think that there's, like I said, there's more studies about it.
Yeah.
I don't have a definitive answer, but I can tell you about my own practice and what I've seen, because I was doing private practice before cell phones, and now you know, where we all live with them.
Exactly.
And they've created a lot of issues. So they've created a lot of social issues. They've created issues at school. There's bullying. But I think the biggest issue is what are the messages that you receive. So some of them, and I'll tell you, I have people from age 8 to 80 talk about, well, I posted something and so somebody did not like it. Does that mean I'm not likable?
Right.
Yeah. Or is that person angry with me because they didn't like something? Or why do I only have 5 versus 500 likes?
Yep.
And I really admire this one person because they've got 2,000 followers. And so, you know, it's very hard for me as one person to teach people to say we can't rely on that for our self-esteem. I think as a society we have to figure out something to do with this, because it is I think a big issue. I think people are measuring themselves, and I'm sure I'm just as guilty.
Right.
I always tell people, why would I post the ugly pictures of me? You know,
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Like, so everybody has this impression that everybody's doing better than them.
And that's comparison. Exactly.
Comparison is absolutely key. So the other part of it too is, so human beings are social creatures. The happiest people on the planet are the people who live in strong communities. So villages, people go to, honestly, in England, people go to pubs because they sit and they socialize. When you have a phone in front of your face, you are not socializing. When you're playing video games, you're not socializing. You can talk, but face-to-face socialization is best, and it's key. And you're learning social skills. You're learning how to act in society. You learn how to make better friends and closer, friendships. So I think like you said, kind of the comparison, but you also have the impact of loss of day-to-day interaction. You'll talk to most teachers these days, and they'll tell you that behavior has changed.
Yeah.
Kids are not able to talk to teachers like
Tony was saying that.
Yeah, like they're a professional. It's like they're another kid, or they don't look you in the eye. So society's changing in that fashion.
We had a retired investigator come on the podcast as well, and he was saying that police nowadays, or the candidates that are coming in to be police officers, they don't know how to de-escalate a situation because everything's through the phone. So they text rather than talk to have a tough conversation. So he said the bar is being lowered. He goes, and it's kind of scary, but it's like, you know, he's probably now in his 60s, but when he first started, that was one of the areas that he excelled at, is talking to people from all walks of life. He goes, now they can't even do that. They can't even do that because they don't know how to have tough conversations. So we see it everywhere, which is scary, but it just goes to show you the effects of social media.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
So we can talk a lot about the mood disorders for a while here, okay? I do want to touch on a few more things. I know you do too.
No, for sure.
And we wanted to talk about maybe people having issues with transitions in their lives. Okay, because everyone always, I heard a really interesting kind of thought, which was, you're always going through a transition in some way, shape, or form. It's just how you handle it, how you recognize it, and how you move forward with it. And I thought it was very interesting because people think of transitions as just moments, maybe, rather than longer periods of time. So what are some transitions that you see as maybe themes that are troublesome for some people when they're having a hard time navigating them?
Well, let me see. I'm going to try to do that from a time perspective.
Sure.
The first major one I think is oftentimes kids graduating from high school or college and trying to figure out their path. That's a big one. And one thing I frequently say to them is, your life has always been structured. There's always an expectation. You graduate from first grade, you go to second grade.
Right.
You know, and then all of a sudden you graduate high school and college, and you are free to do what you want to do, and it's overwhelming. It's very overwhelming, very scary. I mean, this whole idea of adulting is so overwhelming, you know, for many people.
Yeah, we have those conversations when we speak at the prisons as well. They have structure all day. They get out, they have no structure, and it's their free time.
Overwhelming.
It's overwhelming, like you said.
And I think that's I think it's a complex issue because, back to what you were saying, is that, you know, when you let your kids go out and free play, they learn how to problem solve. They learn how to create, you know, their own destiny. And they learn to be imaginative. And those are traits that are important to become successful adults later on. But when you're going to school systems that are rigid, and you have expectations, all of a sudden, you know, you graduate and you don't know what to do. So I would love to see if we can foster more independent thinking, you know, with our children as they grow, and more responsibility. You know, a lot of kids don't have responsibility. You know, they show up to where they need to be, but I think the earlier they have their responsibilities, I think the more set up they are for life.
Yeah, for sure, I can agree with that. I had a lot of that growing up. I think, you know, even simple things like when I was 16, like it was expected you got a job, but at that point though, you're making money. If you want things, you have earnings now to acquire those things, right? And it kind of taught me that the whole value of a dollar thing, yes, but like the responsibility of having money and what it should be going for.
Absolutely.
What are some other things that people have issues with transition?
Marriage.
Yes.
Now that's interesting. Can you elaborate on that? Is it where it's like the male versus female role that is kind of maybe,
or losing like the single life identities? What would that be?
I think that there's multiple. I mean, obviously it's, you know, depends on the person.
True,
so I think it can go so many different ways. I've heard people get married and now what? You know, it's kind of like, it was exciting, it's not exciting right now. Well, you know, marriage marriage is not always exciting.
Yeah,
you know,
true.
so kind of managing that adjustment. Yes, sometimes it is the issues of in regards to, and this is a much more recent issue. I've seen this. This is something we really didn't talk about 15 years ago, but more and more younger couples are talking about delineating responsibilities of like, if you do this, I do that.
Mhm.
You know, where I think traditionally it was, you know, one was cooking, the other one was, you know, mowing the lawn.
Yep.
They're really, really trying to do a equal job as possible. So I
Yeah.
think that is something that people are trying to hold each other accountable.
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
Do you see where like friction may start from that? Because everything has to be equal rather than, you know, there's some days that I'm maybe not at my top
Yeah.
and Val may have to pick up the slack, or vice versa. But do you
Right.
feel that there tends to be friction where it has to be equal like that? Because I could see there could be some issues, you
Mhm.
know, like some resentment.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think when you marry your partner, you need to accept that they're not perfect beings,
It's huge.
and you are not robots.
Mhm.
That you
Yeah.
can't just sit there with a calculator and calculate everything.
Yeah.
We all have our flaws.
Mhm.
We all have our personalities and our backgrounds that we bring with us. And we can learn and we can change, but there's also a level of acceptance. And I'll tell you a really quick story. It's one of my favorite stories. When I was getting married to my husband, we had to do pre-Cana, which is in the Catholic Church. Before you get married, you meet with a priest and you take classes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you take a test, and you have to write something that the other person irritates you. And I wrote down, my husband is always late. So he was my fiance. So
Yeah,
he's
right.
always late. And the priest looks at him and said, "What are you going to do to change this?" And he's like, "Well," and I said, "Wait, let me stop right there. I know him well enough, he'll never change. So my job is to accept that's who he is.
Mhm.
Because if I go into this saying this is going to change,
Mhm.
we're going to struggle." So those are like little things,
Yeah.
certain things. Like, I'm stubborn, he has to do it.
Mhm.
I'm better.
Right,
I'm better.
right.
Yeah.
But there's personality traits that sometimes are there that can improve and change, but part of who we are too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that's a long answer for your question is, I think we have to also be compassionate and patient with our partners.
Mhm.
We should always communicate.
Yeah.
We need to figure out our strengths and our weaknesses and figure out how to match them up with the next person.
Mhm.
And it should not be a tit for tat,
Yeah.
because there are going to be times one's going to struggle for a while,
Yeah.
and the other one will pick up the pieces, and then it'll balance the other
Yep.
way as well.
Yeah.
That's
For
huge.
sure.
I love that.
Now I want to ask you a little for selfish reasons, but what about death?
Oh, yes.
And I mentioned death twice now on the podcast.
No, no,
This
no.
isn't some
Hey.
dark
No,
like.
no,
I'm just.
no.
I know. I'm like. I mean, you talked about death earlier too. No, but so I lost my father in 2017. So I'm just interested to kind of hear your perspective on death and the transition as far as that goes too. The struggles that come with that.
Right.
Possibly.
You know something I think, so obviously many people come into therapy because of
Mhm.
losing a loved one.
Yep.
And I think different people will take it differently. I think it's important to grieve, but I think we all grieve in different ways.
Mhm.
I also believe that we cannot expect everybody to grieve the same way. So first things we do is we encourage people to kind of move through the process, like the 5 stages of death. There's
Yep.
the five stages, but not everybody goes through every single stage. Not everybody does it in the predicted way.
That's a good point.
But it's about being able to identify where you're at. It's about your ability to talk about your memories.
Mhm.
How did you leave it off with that person?
Mhm.
What does that person mean to you? I think everybody's so different with that
Yeah.
experience, and
Right.
I think the biggest concern is if you bottle it up.
Mhm.
So again, the other part of it too is everybody's good for the first 2 weeks after death.
Mhm.
Everybody's bringing you flowers. They're helpful. 3 months down the line, when you're really struggling, people
Mhm.
disappear, and then
Yeah.
they wonder
That's
why you're not better yet.
Wow.
Okay.
That's really
it?
interesting.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So it happens pretty frequently that when
So that's where that tough transition part comes in, maybe like 3 months down the road then.
Yeah, it could be later on down the line. I mean, for some people it's immediate.
Yeah,
I've worked with people within 2 days of somebody passing because it could have been something unexpected or traumatic.
Yep.
You have people down the line who say, why am I not better yet? And you find out they don't have much support, so they're not talking about it. So my goal is to get them to be open about it. To also, and that's it, okay, again, as Americans, we like to bottle things up sometimes.
Especially males.
Especially males.
Yeah.
And so giving people the opportunity to say, you're supposed to cry.
Yeah.
Like you are supposed to feel sad. Don't let anybody tell you that you're not supposed to. In other parts of the world, people still wear black for a year because there's an honoring. And I also believe in that year, you have, I call it the year of firsts. So it's a tough year because every Thanksgiving, for this first Thanksgiving, you're going to be struggling because now there's an empty chair, you know, and so everything's changed.
Yeah.
And another one too is we also have to be we have to honor people who also lose pets. That's something that it has come up quite frequently. For so many people, pets are their number one. It's their, you know, like,
for sure.
you know,
they're
unconditional
like
friend.
Exactly.
Yes.
They're part of the family.
They're part of the family as well. So we see a lot of grieving that way as well. On the other hand, too, we also see getting ready to die. You know, I've worked with people who have made choices that they don't want to continue with treatment and making the plans and preparing themselves and preparing others for decisions that they've made. So that could be very difficult too, but where therapy can be very helpful is having that unconditional support.
Yeah.
Because if you tell somebody, I don't want to continue with treatment, they're going to try to talk you into it because they want you to continue to live.
Yeah. Right.
So sometimes being there to kind of say, let's go through what you want.
That is.
And honor that.
Now, I want to ask this because I've found, because my wife's a teacher, and so a lot of times, especially with John and I's like personal development, we've learned that how divorce can really impact children. And so when Val and I are talking and she talks about maybe like a behavioral issue with a student, my first question is, well, what's their home life like? Can you kind of just talk about the impact that divorce can have on kids, and maybe if there is a divorce, and if you recommend children maybe seek therapy just to kind of so that they can understand that it's not because of them or anything.
Right.
If you could just kind of talk about that.
Okay. So I don't believe every child should go to therapy if their parents are divorcing. I think if you have parents that can work together, that could sit down with the child and explain things, I think kids can be okay. Okay. I'll get back to that in a bit, but I want to answer the other question that you had asked in terms of kind of the negative. So when parents get divorced, obviously children react. They love their parents, and every child wants their parents to stay together forever. Even when you're 45 years old, you still have this kind of vision of what would my life been like if my parents were together.
Right.
So when your parents divorce, your world does fall apart. Everything changes. You don't have the same house. You don't have the same financial capabilities. You don't have the same lifestyle. And then you have two parents that you have to kind of spend different times with, right? And so it's really disruptive. So frequently, academics can suffer from anguish, feeling depressed, feeling sad. Kids' behaviors can change. You might see more clingy behavior, more dependent behavior, or you could see the opposite, the acting out, the throwing things around, stomping, feet type of behavior. Teenagers are more likely to be more provocative. They're more likely to engage in alcohol and drugs and sexual behaviors as well. One of the long-term aspects of divorce is, interestingly, kids who grow up in a divorced family often have it rougher later on with relationships, because they don't learn what healthy relationships are like, or how to, obviously a divorce, the model is when there's kids can perceive when things get tough, you leave. Okay.
Oh, that's a good point.
So I think that when you have divorced children, I think it's really important later on in life to go back to therapy and say, what does this put me at risk for? You know, how can I learn to be comfortable in a loving relationship? How do I learn to communicate?
Right, because is it almost like they see the solution to the problem they could be having is to leave?
It could potentially be, absolutely.
Right.
That could be one of the solutions for sure.
Got you. Okay.
You know, so on the other hand, I think if you have parents who can get along, if you know, kids tend to be very resilient, so you can have a lot of kids who come up from divorced families who are okay.
Yeah.
They're okay. And especially if parents are on the same page and they have the same parenting plan and they can communicate with each other, it's an ideal situation, you know, for the child. If they can't, kids struggle a little bit more, but they can still become resilient. I'm from a divorced family, I you know, what was the best thing for me was I had my aunt and uncle who had a very good relationship.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
it was great to watch them and see how they manage their family.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of that, like seeking another influential couple, if you will, in your life as being that anchor, right?
Absolutely. Well,
Never thought of that.
Yeah. So I know you said your wife is a teacher.
Yeah.
We underestimate the impact of other adults on individuals' lives.
Yeah.
So you know, I always tell people, try to be that person that somebody can look up to, because they might struggle at home, but they might count on you to be the angel out there, the one who's gonna, or the one who's gonna call them out.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. Sometimes divorced families, they don't discipline. Sometimes it's like everybody wants to be the fun parent, and kids get away with so much.
Wow.
And they come to school, and I think they need discipline as well. So it's very multifaceted.
Wow. That's interesting.
That is super fascinating.
It is, man. I love it.
That's
I love
awesome.
it.
You know, and I just want to say this too, because about you know, someone to emulate or someone to kind of mirror or have a mentor or something. When we spoke at Cybulski Reintegration, we noticed the second time that we came and talked, there were a lot of inmates that took what we said and applied it. And there was this one gentleman who became a personal trainer, and there were guys that he was basically training, and he was just so vivacious, full of energy. And this time around, he was really engaging, because we actually helped our buddy create a men's group. He had the idea, he ran some ideas by us, and so we go and talk to the men's group, and then we speak to the large group. And so when we spoke to the large group, we had one gentleman come over to us and just him really open up about how he's struggling and stuff. And my first response was, you need to partner up with him, because he's doing great right now. He's radiating, he's exercising, he radiates positivity. And you could tell this gentleman was just so down in the dumps that he needed that, just to kind of uplift himself. And so it's great to hear that you had someone else to say, this is what a healthy relationship is, you know.
And I want to comment on what you guys do, which I think is fantastic. Is you know, you're making an impact, and I think so you came in and talked, and then somebody emulated you. So it's incredible. Again, you know, sometimes we think what we do is so small, but it's quite large. One thing that you both are doing, which I like, is I'm seeing more and more men in therapy.
Yeah.
Yes, finally. You know, I think when I first started, it was usually the woman trying to get their husbands into therapy, and now I have more and more men coming in on their own. And you know, I think they struggle to be vulnerable. They struggle to start talking, but once they get going, they value it so much. And what I love is that many of them are shocked by the value of therapy.
Absolutely.
And they go start talking about it with their friends. And then they start recommending it to their friends, and their friends go on. So, you know, again, it's this whole idea of community. It's this whole idea of communication and connection. So I thank you for helping me, like, get people to,
that's cool.
You know, and motivate.
So, and it's funny because we've talked about therapy a few times, and I've always thought about it. And when my father died, I thought about it as well. And but I always felt that I handled things pretty well. And in my head, I'm like, well, I'm not sure I need it. But I've always heard people say it's a great like maintenance tool almost. It's something that you could apply in everyday life, and you don't realize you don't need it, but it's maintenance.
Right.
But I was always like, how does a session start? Like, if I'm to come in, okay, and I'm just sitting, I told you I wanted to talk about this earlier. If I'm to come in and sit down for my very first therapy session,
right.
I feel I don't have any issues that maybe I need to get off my chest, but I hear that it's good for you, good maintenance.
Sure.
Where would a session begin? Like how would
well,
it,
if
how
that's
would it
how
start,
you
right?
came in,
Right.
okay.
You know, exactly. That's how I came in. I've heard this is good for me. I don't really know what I would want to talk to you about today, but I heard this is a great thing for me to do here. Like in my head, I'm like, where would this even begin?
Right,
you know?
right.
So,
No, I think that's a great question because usually people have an agenda when they come in.
right. You know, right? And I would
Right.
think, oh well,
Right.
I'll tell you like troubling things that happen, right? Like
Yeah.
triggering things in my life, obviously with my father and stuff like
Yes.
that. But like maybe start there. But again, if I feel like I'm doing good with it, or in my mind I feel like I was, it always interested me. Like, where would I even begin?
And so I like that because you know you're absolutely right. I think people walk in and the first thing is like, so what's happening for you?
Mm-hmm.
What brought you here in the first place?
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I'm curious about this. About like, what is this about? Well, what's happening in your life? And you would start talking about it.
Sure.
And then everything. It's almost like an interview. You start talking. Oh, I heard that. Now let's ask you about that.
Right.
And then you just kind of keep going, opening up one door after another after another. That by the end, and you're absolutely right, not everybody has to go to therapy.
Right.
And some people come in and they want to check it out. I will say 100% of them stay. They stay because they're now like, I'm here, and 90% of the time the tissue box is out, and they're all like, I don't know why I'm crying. I'm like, because I'm new and this is so fresh for you. That's why, and good for you to get this out. Do you want to come back? And people will be like, yes, because you find the value of just processing it. It doesn't even have to be like a strategy oriented. It's sometimes just putting it out. And my job is then to kind of lead you down pathways for you to kind of figure it out yourself. I don't do the work for you. I guide you in the direction when you do the work for yourself.
Right. Makes sense.
Okay?
Yep.
And things can come up. And it doesn't mean, and so interesting that you say maintenance, because it is true. I have a lot of people who come in who are in crisis or have an issue that they want to work with, and a lot of them stay and come in for like monthly to bi-monthly check-ins. Because, and I say it's just like any kind of injuries or massage, we get into the kinks, and then you need it once a month just to kind of feel like just even.
Right.
So I think it could be a great tool that way for you too.
Very cool.
That's cool.
That is cool.
So does that mean you're gonna go?
Listen, man, I'm super interested. The more I talk to you, the more I want to talk to you. So it's
That's great.
Yeah.
So we touched briefly on health issues.
Yeah.
What type of health issues are you normally helping people navigate?
At this stage, most of it is primarily when people are coming in with anxiety, especially. Many of them are complaining about like gastrointestinal issues, headaches, migraines, dizziness. Then on top of that, if you already have a health issue, for example, asthma, it gets worse. It gets worse with anxiety. It gets worse with stress.
Can I say something real quick?
Absolutely.
Because this is making me think now. Because my wife had some gastro issues a couple months ago, and it was when I noticed that she just seemed very stressed. And I wanted to kind of say, hey, you're kind of dealing with a lot of stress. And of course, she went to the doctors, got checked, nothing was wrong.
Yeah.
They did say that her stress level was high, so they got her some cortisol to lower her stress levels. But it's funny how you say how stress can really impact your body. And we have we saw some research where it's 80% of all PCP visits are stress related.
Right.
So it's interesting you say like
that's exactly
stress, you're having GI issues, but it's all coming from like stress or anxiety
Absolutely.
stuff.
Because your mind, from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, there's people we talk about the mind-body connection, but there's the mind-gut connection too.
Yes.
So that plays a component in that as well.
Huge one, because there is a super highway. I always tell people, like, there's so many highways throughout your body, you know, and there's you've got the interstates, you've got the routes, you've got everything.
Yeah.
But between the mind and the gut, there is a direct path. So what one experiences, the other experience as well. So many people who, for example, have GI issues, many of them go on, get prescribed antidepressants. And it's because the serotonin, that's where I'm trying to remember like the pathway, but that's where the serotonin receptors are. Serotonin is what helps with depression and with anxiety. And so you're not just treating the mind, you're treating the gut. So, and vice versa.
Yeah.
But again, it also comes back to what we call the microbiome.
Yes.
So again, it goes back to what you eat is how you feel.
Yes.
So there are so many different mechanisms that affect our body. Like I said, migraines, asthma, autoimmune. There was a period of time I saw so many teenage girls with autoimmune disorders. They all had some kind of, whether it's Lyme disease or oh my gosh, what is that called? I'm blanking on it.
Lupus?
Not as much lupus, but kind of like
just throwing that one out
like
there.
chronic fatigue syndrome, things like that.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting because they were all high achieving, straight A, every activity kind of experience. And then boom, they were sick and they could not get back to school. And I think it went from, again, our body was telling us too much.
Yeah.
The alarm in the
But-
body.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these kids stopped and almost resisted going back, because going back means going back to everything they were doing before.
Yeah.
So it was really interesting to see that, because they did have true physical diagnosis and phenomenon. There was a major psychological component to this as well. So it's empowering these kids to get back and not take on as much. Say no.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Wow.
And I'll ask you this, and we can edit it out if you don't want to answer it.
No, it's
but
fine.
Do you way to preface that, by the way?
Yeah, right. Well, because I know it can be touchy on some levels.
Yeah.
Do you think we're too quick to prescribe people medications or things rather than diving into more of what you're talking about?
Oh, I love that question.
Okay.
Because you know what my favorite thing to do is, I love reading about health issues, issues
Yeah.
around the world,
Yeah.
and how different people respond to it. So yes, I honestly, there are more and more people going to naturopaths these days.
Yes.
And I think it is because people don't want to be prescribed,
Yes.
whether it is for mental health issues or physical issues. I think it, because if you are always giving out the pill, you're never treating the source.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
and it's even with therapy, I have great physicians who love to refer to me. I'm so thankful for them. But, many doctors won't, because you're feeling depressed, why don't you go on an SSRI? Why don't you go on to an antidepressant? And I tell people, that will carry you so far. I'm not against it, because it does help. It does help with motivation and therapy.
Yeah.
But you really need to get to the cause if you
Right.
want long-term benefits from
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
So no, I agree with you.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for answering that. Yeah, that's
It's interesting. I asked my daughter if I could use her as an example. So my daughter, about a year and a half ago, started having vertigo episodes,
Interesting.
and
I've heard
Out of nowhere?
I'm telling you, overnight, and it ended up, we went through a series of doctors and MRIs and all kinds of stuff, and she ended up being diagnosed with something called vestibular migraines. So when I get migraines, it is pain, and it's a little, I'm feeling off, I feel like nauseous and all this stuff, I can't concentrate.
Oh, jeez.
But for her, when she gets migraines, the whole world spins. And on top of that, it wouldn't go away. So she would have major bouts of it where she could not walk.
Oh,
And
wow.
in between, she would have these episodes where she just said, I'm walking on a cloud every day, or in a ship, and it keeps moving. So this persisted. She still has it, but it's much better. But it was going on for almost a year. So it's so interesting, because my experience with her was the mindset of, we have to accept that we have this. how do we cope with this?
Yeah.
Because we need to learn how to live with this.
Right.
You know, and there were times where she fought me, but I taught her the deep breathing skills like I
Yeah.
do everybody else.
Yeah.
And I sat with her and I said, okay, what do we need to get through today? Or let's first day when she went back to school, let's go for 2 hours. Let's go for 2 hours every day this week. Then we're gonna keep pushing it. But what do you need to think? What do you need to focus on when you're there? And she likes to focus on funny things. I said, great, because that's gonna get you through the day. Because if you focus on how you feel physically, you're not gonna last.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was a really interesting experience to be with her through all this. And I remember at one point somebody suggested therapy, and she's like, I got my mom.
That's huge. That's also probably pretty rewarding that you could help your daughter through that.
Yes.
You know, rather than be like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. It's, you came at it from, all right, use the tools that you have, reframe it, and let's get through that.
Right.
Rather than, hey, let's go on medication, let's do all this.
Yeah.
Especially because she's so young too.
Exactly. Well, and the other part of it too is, if you don't push yourself, or if I don't push her, she won't go to school.
Yeah.
And that school refusal becomes bigger and bigger and becomes the monster you have to fight. The biggest thing when you have anxiety about something, she was starting to have anxiety about school because she would fall, you know. So
Right,
of course,
right.
you know, in front of your
Exactly right.
students,
Yeah.
falling is awful.
Yeah.
So, but when I told her, I'm like, you always have to fight and engage with what you're scared of,
Right.
so
Right.
you can defeat the fear.
Yeah.
And so she made it.
That
She made
mentality is huge, because she can carry that same mentality with her all her life. So if she experiences a challenge in college or her first job or something, she can refer back to that experience and be like, I can get through this.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So what I wanted to talk about too is, because clearly you have to bring your A game every single day for your clients.
I try.
And so I'm sure that can be extremely taxing on you. So what outlets do you have to kind of just decompress and enjoy?
Well, before I come into work, I actually love to walk. So I have a good friend, we do 4 miles, you know, a nice hike, you know.
That's awesome.
Several times a week, so that's a great way just to decompress.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Starting to do some, you know.
Get that iron in.
Yeah,
Getting
exactly.
that
Yeah.
iron in.
I'm trying to.
Yeah.
And then when I leave work, one of the first things I do is I turn on Smartless podcast. I listen to that. I don't know if you guys ever listened to that. It's
No, I'm
hysterical.
gonna write that down.
Oh, Smartless! It's so funny.
Smartless?
Is it?
It's Will Arnett and
Oh, okay.
Sean Hayes and just Jason Bateman,
Yep. Okay.
and it's just funny. So it's just a way to kind of turn this off.
That's huge.
One of my hidden things is I have a completely different identity at home. Like, I turn off psychology. In my town, people forget that I'm a psychologist. They look at me as a mom.
Right.
They look at me as everything else. I mean, I'm just one of the crowd, and I think that's the best thing to do is because if I brought psychology everywhere I go, I wouldn't have many friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
You know,
It's like you're dissecting every situation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
and I
right.
wouldn't have a husband.
Yeah.
You know, my kids already, can you stop using the word appropriate?
Sorry. Sorry.
Okay. So, but the other things I do, I'm a singer. So
That's awesome.
yes, I enjoy singing. I've done it for many different like chorales, but through college and post college, I sang at, you know, big performing centers.
Favorite
I've done
musician?
it. I'm sorry?
Favorite musician or singer?
Oh gosh.
Pavarotti.
I know. Put it on the spot here.
Oh,
What'd you say? John Mayer.
No, actually, my favorite singer nowadays, Adam Lambert.
Really?
Really?
Absolutely. I
Does
saw
he
him
hit
in
the high
concert 2
notes?
weeks ago.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
He's got just the best vocal technique and not a note out of place. Like
Wow.
it is. He
So
can.
you recognize that stuff when you listen to
I
music,
do.
like
I
the
do.
nitty gritty detail stuff, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I can hear where the sound's coming from,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
his technique is phenomenal.
That's cool.
Sing anything. So yeah, he's my absolute favorite.
Cool.
But yeah, so I love doing that. I like to travel. I like to try new things.
Yeah.
You know, I used to own a Harley.
That's awesome.
I took a.
I had a crotch rocket.
You did.
Yeah. Lime green.
Harley sounds more badass. Just so you know.
No, it totally does.
Just so we're on the same page.
It totally does. Totally does. I have to ask though,
Yeah.
when you started singing in front of people,
Oh yeah.
was that difficult initially? Like because initially, because I'm thinking of like when we public speak and stuff, there's always that, you know, you're you're excited, but you're also very nervous. Was there part of you that was super nervous, but you're just really excited because this is a new experience?
Oh, absolutely. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's absolutely terrifying. And you know what's hard is that the voice is one of the only instruments that gets affected by nerves, because when you sing and you're nervous, you crack up, you know, or your vibrato's off, or your notes go flat. So it's like, and you're sitting there and you're like, and you notice everything going wrong, and you're like, how do I fix it?
You're real time, you're thinking
exactly,
about
and you're
it.
like, you can't just stop it, you know. So you keep on going. But I think it's like anything. The more that you do something, the easier it becomes. And I do it at church right now, and it's my safe space. And you know, I love the songs that we sing. We tend to sing a little bit more contemporary stuff. So, and I have a really good partner, the pianist. She and I are friends, and it's just we rock it out. It's fun.
Awesome. Yeah,
it's really fun. So I enjoy that part of it. And I could probably do it. The funniest thing is I am terrified of speaking in front of people.
Wow.
I'm much more likely to sing. Yes.
Wow.
Because all the notes are in front of me.
Yeah.
Well, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. And it's funny you say it, because like we could talk in front of people, sing. I could not do that.
Well, yeah,
So
but we also aren't skilled at it. So.
This is also very true. This is also very true. It's also very true. So this has been amazing. It's been
really
amazing.
has.
And I just want to say, you know, I want to recognize you, because before Val and I got married, we came and saw you because there was a point in our relationship where our communication was just a bit off. And so Val, and I give a lot of credit to Val, she said, hey, you know, let's go see Dr. Muhlhauser. And you were so helpful, because you were able to open our lines of communication so that we each could be valued and we could be heard. And we can talk about our thoughts and our feelings in a way where it's not combative. And I just want to say thank you, because you know, our marriage is incredibly strong, and I would say you were very instrumental in that. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Because you guys are great people.
Awesome.
Thank you. This was great.
Yeah.
We really appreciate you donating some of your time to us tonight.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite, if not my favorite, conversations.
Yeah,
This was,
for sure.
So we are 82 minutes in.
Oh my gosh!
Which is okay. So I'm been watching them just to make sure it's still recording. So I'm like, this is so freaking good. I do not want to miss a minute of this. And usually we say like, oh, like 45 minutes is our spot, and I could talk to you for 82 more minutes.
Yes, wow.
This is
awesome.
so good. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
We know this helps a lot of people who are listening. To anyone who is listening, we hope and encourage you to share this episode, because there's so many good nuggets in here. Again, we appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for coming on today.
And thank you so much for having me.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
That was
so good.
Good.
That
Really?
was fire. Oh yeah.
Oh my
that